Boy, it took us a month to get back to the wall.
Yes, I know. That's a pity, isn't it? And I've really been missing it.
Okay, here we are at last. I know you've been waiting and anticipating, even questioning whether I'd abandoned the entire wall project, but I want you to remember something. That's not like me. If I decide to start a project, I will see it through to the end, even if unexpected events sometimes interrupt and I have to delay a bit. And remember that all my first listens of the entire album are already available on my Ko-fi and Patreon. So if you don't want to wait until they are published here on YouTube, you can always check out my membership pages, which help to support this entire project. By now, you know that little Liesel came early, and that has thrown off my plans and schedules quite a bit. And not only that, but we also have some other projects going on in other parts of our lives too, so everything really went crazy for a bit. Also, as some of you have pointed out from time to time, this entire Virgin Rock project is quite taxing for two reasons. First, it is just one of many different things in my life. And second, I do not treat it carelessly. I cannot just throw some random ideas in front of the camera or merely tell you a song is cool or how nice it makes me feel, or just that it was written in a certain key and has a few certain chord names and then call it good. And since the kind of quality that I want here requires a lot of personal investment, sometimes things just take a bit longer than I expected or wanted. But anyway, here we are, finally back to the wall. And one other thing, I do really enjoy my time with this album. I know that some of you were worried it might be too depressing when I announced that I would take on this project, but it is a great piece of art, and I am looking forward to each installment, anticipating every step of the journey just like you do. So, if there are sometimes delays, hold on tight. I am not abandoning it. All right, let's now talk about Young Lust, which is a really great piece of music. And here's why I say this. As I spent more time with this song, I was rather surprised at how I found myself growing to appreciate it. If you remember my first listen, you might have noticed that I really struggled to feel it, to become personally engaged with it, because it's not the type of music that I feel naturally drawn towards, and I haven't spent much time at all engaging with this type of music. So I tend to keep it at arm's length, so to speak. But of course, if I'm going to give something a fair chance, I know that I have to make the effort to step inside, and that's what I have been endeavoring to do with every song that I present on this channel. And in the process of doing so with Young Lust, I really began to appreciate, and not only appreciate, but to actually engage with and connect with it in my own way. Of course, my way of connecting to it is very possibly not your way, or perhaps even the right way. But that's beside the point. What's important for me is that I actually did find it to be, do I dare to say, satisfying, even special. Is this song really special in the sense of being unique or significant or outstanding relative to other songs in the same style? That I cannot say. But in this album, and as it relates to my experience exploring and becoming familiar with this music, I have to say that for me, it is special. And while I am by no means qualified to say so, I will also say that to me it sounds classic. Classic but not stereotypical. Like, if someone were to ask, what is hard rock music? I imagine you could answer with this song and say, this is the standard by which we measure. Of course, I don't know if that is really true. but that's how I perceive it at this point in my journey. All that aside, it's a very different sound from what we've heard on this album so far. It almost feels like it doesn't belong here. Not only does the musical style not really fit, but we also don't find the same kind of musical ideological expressions in it. We don't even have the iconic motif, which has been present throughout so much of our journey up to now. And this motif, I want to remind you, sounds like this. Those 4 notes that I've talked about in previous episodes, which famously show up here. So we don't hear that visibly, noticeably in this particular song. There's a level of misfit that is felt because there's nothing obviously linking it to the rest of the work. Rather like someone just said, we need another song to insert here, and went off to select some random already composed song which really had no particular reason to be there other than we liked it. And yet, that in itself contributes in its own way to the effect it has here at this point in the album, because one of the things this song is expressing is the disconnected new boy, stranger in town experience. He doesn't belong, just like this song itself feels like it doesn't belong. Well, of course, there's a simple, practical explanation for this apparent lack of continuity. It turns out that this particular song was co-written by Gilmour. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if someone tells me that Gilmour wrote the whole thing, because it's so different from the rest of what we've been hearing. Nevertheless, this difference and its foreign quality can be accepted as suitable for this moment in the album. However, looking a bit closer, we can find some links, both musically and in the lyrics, though we do have to dig a bit to find them. I want to talk about the music first, and then we'll take up the lyrics. As I said, we don't see the ubiquitous musical motif in this song, but is it really completely missing? Not quite. Right at the beginning, we have this. That's where it says, I am just a new boy. And then the next phrase says, where are all the good times? What happens if we play that inverted? Do you hear it? So that's what we end up with. This. Only. So it is there, just disguised by flipping it upside down. Now, was this intentional? I have no idea, and I'm a bit reluctant to read too much into it. But the fact is, it is there. Now, I want to show you the same thing and what it looks like on the music score, because a visual representation can really help us understand this that's happening here. What we have on the screen here is the first page of Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2, alongside the first page of Young Lust. Now, the first thing we have to take note of is that each of these songs is in a different key. So as I'm pointing this out, you might at first say, wait, is that really true? Because it can be a bit confusing if the notes don't match exactly. But never fear, I'll walk you through it and we will figure this out together. So, here in Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, we see this famous little set of 4 notes where it says we don't need no. And those 4 notes repeat in education. Now let's go through and name these notes. It starts with a D, then it goes to an E, then it goes up to an F, then it goes back to an E. It sounds like this. D, E, F, E. And that figure can repeat as many times as the music wants it to be. Now, if I am going to move it into the key in which Young Lust is set, we simply have to move it up 1 note. It will sound the same, only I'm playing E, F sharp, G, F sharp. And I can do the same thing here. So that's what is happening, and those are the notes that we have in Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, and that is our iconic thematic content, which we have been noticing at points along the way in this work. Now, looking on the other side of the page at Young Lust, we have these notes right here, which are G, F sharp, E, F sharp, G. And if you remember, I just showed you the reverse pattern, E, F sharp, G, F sharp, E. You can see, even if you don't read music, the shape of the notes are starting higher, descending, and returning back upwards. Whereas on this other page here, the shape of the notes are, let me erase this line here so you can see, we'll follow through, starting lower, ascending, and then returning down. It's the exact same melodic figure, just placed in mirror image vertically, not front to back, but as if you have something reflecting in a pool of water, so to speak, where it is simply the same pattern inverted. That is what we have at the beginning here of Young Lust. And that is what happens again, where it says, where are all these good times? And in that respect, we do still have this musical motif in a sort of camouflaged, upside down, flipped over manifestation. But it is there.
What does it mean?
What does it mean? Well, as I said, I'm reluctant to read too much into it, but I have some thoughts that kind of make sense to me at least. It kind of fits because this song is communicating a personality, a message that is the complete opposite of Pink. I mean, the Pink we've come to know is certainly not a highly sexually charged, stereotypically masculine young man. So I think it's entirely suitable for the musical thematic material to also be the opposite or the upside down of what we have come to know up to this point in the song. Another feature of this composition is the way in which the pitch of the melody aligns with the lyrical content. Let me explain what I mean. Notice how the high E is featured during the phrases dealing with stranger, desert land, and refugee. All of these words, which kind of convey the same idea, are placed up here, such as, who's going to show this stranger around? And then it descends. But most of that is up here on the high E in the voice. This helps to create that strident sense of urgency that we hear in the voice, because it's easy to do that when we're up in the higher range. In contrast, The dirty woman phrases are pitched a bit lower, in the mid-range, where the voice can be warmer and they're presented with a strong swinging feel to their rhythm. Now, what I mean by swing is I can play this straight, but if I swing it, where we have short, long, then it gets more of that luscious, sensual quality. And then, because we don't hear the voice really living in the lower range, when it does descend, its effect is noticeable, helping to give expression to what we could call the bass passions that are brought into focus in this song. For example, when he sings Dirty Girl and drops to that lower D, like this. Or the way the question, who's going to show this stranger around, is carried downwards at the end, rather than inflecting upwards as the speech pattern typically does. I especially like how the phrase, oh babe, set me free, traverses the range starting at the high G, and then falling down until we have free, basically a whole octave lower, descending even below that. So it sounds like this. Up here, and then falling down, and then his voice really falls through there. And I think it's a wonderfully expressive little moment in which the message of the whole song is condensed into just a handful of notes over the course of just a few seconds. And then, of course, we have the guitar solo section, which, as I mentioned in my first listen, is outstanding. I think the choice of tone quality employed here, the various articulations and effects, everything from the squeaks all the way to the grittiness, are very masterfully employed to expand and deepen the song. And I want to show you compositionally one or two of the reasons his solo fits so seamlessly into the song and, as I mentioned in my first listen, keeps the lyrics and therefore their message front and center in our consciousness, in our inner ear, and in our mind. And that is due in part to the way he handles the rhythms. Remember how it sounds when the voice sings, I need a dirty woman. Let's isolate that rhythm simply by speaking the lyrics in time. I need a dirty woman. Da 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 da. Now, when we look at the guitar solo, or listen to the guitar solo, you will hear that. And I'm not going to try to recreate this guitar solo on my harp. It really won't work. But if you do go back and listen to that section of the song, try to pick out how many times you hear this rhythm feature. Da da da, da 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 da, da 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 da. It's the start. I need a dir, and then the guitar takes it on to something else. You'll notice that nearly every phrase he plays starts either with that exact rhythm or some variant of it. And then, not only does the rhythmic element of this I need a dirty woman phrase feature in this section, but the notes, those two pitches side by side, da da bum bum bum, near the beginning of this section, this guitar solo section, we hear it first down in the bass, and it's somewhere down here. And then this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, two notes, shows up again towards the end, where the guitar also takes up this oscillating pair of notes, brings them down to its lower range, gives them this wonderfully gritty tone. And the idea is kept in our ears throughout this part of the song in that way, even though it is not being verbalized at this point. This whole idea of, I need a dirty woman, whether it's rhythmically or pitch-wise, it is present in so much of this solo section. Another great linking element is how he takes this high-pressured E that we noticed being used in the vocal part and features it in the guitar as well. Only, of course, he doesn't necessarily use the exact same number of repetitions of it. And there are some other notes thrown in there too, which are kind of hard to hear the similarity because the harp has such a different tone. But then a bit later, he expands on that some more by turning his attention to the chord that E belongs to, rather than just to the E itself. And so he ends up playing G up here, along with the E. And that is all part of the C chord, C, E, G. Now, I've spent my time focusing on the guitar and the voice, but I want to add that this song simply couldn't exist without the drums and the bass. This kind of music requires it. Without the cathartic thump thump underneath everything and the syncopation built into those parts, we simply wouldn't feel what we do in this song. And the way that they are handled in this song is very highly effective. There's a really great balance between placing the beat, emphasizing the beat, the tone quality chosen, which drums are struck. And then, of course, the little moments where the syncopation or the rhythm shifts, or where the bass moves a bit more, or settles where it can really support all of this that's going on. Musically, we end up with a strong, instinctive, physical quality. Or perhaps we could say what many of you refer to as a headbanging effect. In fact, I would say the music fits the lyrical content like a glove. It has a sensual, down and dirty, impulsive, physically engaged character, which suits the sexual craving expressed in the lyrics very, very well. But here's one of the things that I find fascinating about this song in the context of the ball. This is not at all like Pink. And that is the key to uncovering another message which it communicates. Because while the song on its own, and it really does stand on its own, portrays this young lust as a self-indulgent sex with wild abandon, when viewed in the larger scheme of the entire album, and especially in the context of coming from Empty Spaces and going into One of My Turns, this sexual portrayal becomes an allegory, a parable, about other, less obvious self-indulgences. So let's start at the beginning of the song. In fact, before the beginning, to see what we can discover about this. Remember, we came from Empty Spaces, and in fact, Empty Spaces segues straight into Young Lust. It's a bit like a prelude, and it's so closely linked that many of you strongly urged, even begged me, to treat them both together as one unit. And of course, Empty Spaces is the expression of Pink's dilemma, distilled into 3 questions. What shall we use to fill the empty spaces where we used to talk? How should I fill the final places? How should I complete the wall? And I am going to argue that one of the things Young Lust does is to give us Pink's answer to these questions. I am just a new boy, an inexperienced person in this place, a stranger in this town, a newbie who feels rather lost, who doesn't really belong. And who's going to show this stranger around? From the very beginning of this song, we sense that this is not the Pink we have seen up to this point. There's been a dramatic change, and the person we meet here feels like someone entirely different from the boy we've come to know before. He's a rock star now. Looking at the movie, he's worshipped and desired by his fans and peers. How did he get here? It's a fair question, but it's a bit irrelevant, just as other biographical questions such as when or how or where he met his wife really don't matter. What does matter is, why did Waters choose the rock star for his main subject now, here, in this moment, at this point in the album? Interestingly, in his 1979 BBC interview, Waters said that young lust happened to him, although he would not come out with it as he was too frightened. But it's also more than that. For the purpose of this story, he needs to place Pink where, 1, he can have anything he wants, and 2, he is desired by those around him. What could be better than to cast him as a rock star? So now, in this new position, Pink has no limits in exploring and trying to answer his questions. Naturally, as is the common reaction by those who experience oppression and repression, he is trying what was kept away from him before. Mama wouldn't let anyone dirty get through. Mama was going to keep baby healthy and clean. Now that never satisfied Pink. In fact, remember that Pink now doesn't even trust his own mother anymore. So he's going to find out if the things she kept from him are actually what he needs. He is going for dirty now. Oh, I need a dirty woman. Oh, I need a dirty girl. And so the suggestion is that this kind of behavior is Pink's way of filling in the empty spaces where we used to talk. He's no longer looking for a connected relationship, for real intimacy. He's looking to fill the gaps with something that doesn't require any of that. It has to be something, and yet nothing. Now notice the verb need. He doesn't say, I want a dirty woman, or I'd like a dirty girl, but I need. And this gives us another layer to consider. Why does he think he needs her? Will some woman in this desert land, which is an empty space, make me feel like a real man? Take this rock and roll refugee. Oh baby, set me free. Pink is still haunted by his past, by his childhood. He feels he's a prisoner of that past, a slave of what the authorities in his childhood, school and his mother and so forth, fashioned him to be. Now, he has built this wall for protection, only to find himself in a desert land, lost, in an empty space. He discovers that this barrier itself prevents him from being a real man. Now, about this phrase, we can, of course, understand it in multiple ways, and some might argue that I am taking it way beyond what it was intended to communicate. But let's remember that to be a real man, or a real woman, or a real anybody, means to become and allow ourselves to become all that it is to be fully human. To grow into our full capacity, emotionally, psychologically, intellectually, physically, to embrace and continually grow into all of this. And the movie explores this need a bit. It portrays Pink as separate from the rest of the party. He is not with them per se. He is not one of them. Just as we saw long before on the playground, so he is here. But back then, He was actively, innocently reaching out. Now, he is aloof, keeping hidden behind the window, behind his dark glasses. He is visibly unwilling to trust anyone or anything other than isolation, and doesn't want to expose himself in any way. From his distant vantage point, he sets his eyes on one of the dirty women who, notice, looks very much like his wife. And he tentatively ventures out. But as soon as he recognizes that she is only attracted to his public image, his fame, his position, asking for an autograph, and not particularly caring about his person, he wants to go back behind his wall. But this young lady is very persistent, pushing herself in, and Pink is fed up. Now, if he wanted to explore a dirty woman, he surely changed his mind about it. And the next scenes are as non-sexually charged as one could possibly imagine, at least from Pink's side. And this is consistent with the Pink that we find portrayed in the music album, even without the visual aids of the movie. And this is why this song, so visceral, so physical, really doesn't even fit the basic character of Pink. So why did he take her into his hotel room? Obviously, not for the sexual young lust that we find in the song. And here's what I understand about it. Remember, in the movie, this scene continues through the next song, One of My Turns. And we're not there yet, but I want to say something about it here because I think it's important in understanding young lust. You see, Pink's reaction in One of My Turns reveals that his young lust was not actually the sexual lust, but instead it was a wild desire for revenge. And not only to revenge, but also to make his point once for all. We'll talk about it more during the next in-depth, but it is important to notice that and bring it to attention here. On the album, Waters sends us a hint about the nature of this young lust right at the end of the song with the phone call. Why did he place Pink's attempt to reconnect with his wife, which resulted in the discovery that she was cheating on him, right at the end of this song? And what does it have to do with his young lust? Obviously, he was not that young anymore, surely not a teenager. I think it's a hint, suggesting that his lust was not a lust for sex after all, but for this revenge. Pink's behavior here is an effort to make a point, to send a message. If not to his wife, then at least to himself. Self-indulgence at the cost of the last relationship he has, indeed, even cruel revenge, is his driving motive. He is no longer the innocent little child. He's grown. He has power. And he is as heartless and cold and cruel as his childhood abusers. He will reinforce his complete isolation by driving the others as far away as possible. This revenge is Pink's young lust, and it is as young or juvenile as it could possibly be imagined. In music, we sometimes have a note that functions in a very special way. It is possible to have a single note, one single note, function as both the end of one phrase and yet at the same time to be the beginning of the next phrase. Now, we use the term phrase in music a lot. And the other place where we have that is in the literary world. I've never found an exact replica of this in literary art, where this concept of the phrase exists. I guess I've seen some poetry where the last word of a line means one thing and that same word is used again at the beginning of the next line in a new way. But that requires a repetition of the word. And in music, this note can be both at once, without needing to be repeated. And it doesn't only happen in the middle of a piece of music, but sometimes even links one movement to another. And when it does so, it can be an incredibly magical moment. An example of that is the way in which the Adagio cantabile is linked to the Allegro vivace by one single note in Beethoven's cello sonata. There's a link here. If you listen closely, you'll hear the slow movement come to an end on the exact note at the exact moment that the fast movement begins. It is glorious. I think there's something similar going on here with Young Lust. First, we have this song functioning as an answer to the questions posed in empty spaces. And in that regard, it is acting as a closure. At the same time, it opens the topic that revenge and, by extension, other passions can and do fill the same lustful role as and are equal to the sexual passion that this song communicates. And in this regard, it acts as the launching pad, the starting note for what comes next. I'll see you next time.
Did you expect this turn in the album after listening and analyzing its first quarter?
When I was doing my first listen, no. And it caught me by surprise and I didn't really know how to relate to it. I tried, I kind of got into it, but it took me several listens and just sitting down with this song on its own to really consider it before I began to understand.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you can tell that I think it's pretty eloquent and well placed, even though it seems so out of place.
I stand by my opinion. It's the best album ever composed.
I can't judge because I haven't heard all the other albums.
Me neither, but still.
And I've heard some of you say that there are some others that really need attention. So sometime down the road, those will come too.